I remember the silence most of all. The world had grown so quiet by the time we finished the Genesis engine that I could hear things no one should hear in a city. The clicking of insects between concrete cracks, the drip of pipes in broken buildings, the sigh of wind carrying dust over glassless towers. There were no birds, no dogs barking at night. Even the insects that had once thrived on our waste were dying. The earth was shutting down, like a body refusing to fight anymore. I was 39 when the last oak in what used to be called the Appalachian Corridor fell. I saw on the feed, broadcast as if it were a state funeral. People lined up around the trunk, laying plastic flowers and glowing candles made from recycled resin. The real flowers had been gone for years. That was when I realized we weren't mourning trees anymore. We were mourning ourselves. The oceans were worse. I had worked in marine biology before the collapse of my university, before research grants turned into survival credits. Back then, I watched reefs bleach out like bones. Later, whole fish populations vanished in months, leaving empty waters where nothing moved but plastic and oil rainbows. The silence under the sea was worse than on land. Sound carries in water, but when there's nothing alive to make it, you could dive 50 meters and hear your own heartbeat like a drum in your skull. It was that silence, I think, that drove us to build the engine. Not hope, not ambition, but fear of a quiet world that would never wake again. The Genesis engine wasn't my idea. It belonged to a man named Dr. Rainer Kovacs, a geneticist who'd spent decades piecing together DNA fragments of extinct species from preserved samples, fossils, even sediment cores. His vision was bigger than just cloning, though. He wanted to create a machine that could rewind biology on a planetary scale, restoring environments instead of individual creatures. Imagine a planetary defibrillator. That's what he called it when he first pitched it. A shock to the Earth system, enough to jolt life back into rhythm. Most people laughed, or called him insane, or worse, dangerous. But when the governments fell one by one, when the megacities turned into fortresses hoarding what little food was left, the world turned to him. Because when there's nothing left, even the insane start to sound reasonable. I joined the Genesis project in its third year. By then, it was less a lab and more a bunker beneath the shell of what had once been Geneva. We weren't a country anymore. We were survivors pooling scraps of technology into one desperate machine. Engineers worked beside biologists, AI programmers beside climatologists. Every skill, every brain was squeezed into the project like juice from a dying fruit. And it worked. The first test was small, a controlled zone in the Black Forest. Soil samples were enriched by the engine's field emitters. Water was seeded with restored microbiomes. We watched it for weeks, praying. Nothing happened at first. Then one morning, mist curled low over the ground and green broke through. Not weeds, not moss, but ferns, ancient ferns, broad and wet with dew. By nightfall, trees had sprouted like rockets, climbing meters into the sky in hours. We didn't sleep. None of us could. We just watched. And when the first birds appeared, swooping down in flashes of color none of us had seen in years, the entire team wept. Humanity hadn't cried for joy in a long time. That night, we did. The project accelerated after that. Countries that barely existed anymore poured their last reserves into the engine. One more chance, they said. One more gamble. We scaled up. We installed emitters in rivers, oceans, deserts. Within months, landscapes were changing. Brown fields became seas of grass. Lifeless ponds teemed with frogs. Wolves howled in Siberia again. Whales sang in the Atlantic. It felt like magic. It felt like a miracle. For the first time in my adult life, children played outside without masks. Food shortages eased as ecosystems rebuilt themselves. The world was still scarred, but the healing had begun. I should have known it wouldn't stop there. The engine wasn't just restoring what we remembered. It was restoring what the Earth remembered. And the Earth's memory was older than us. Far, far older. The first signs were brushed off as anomalies. Strange tracks in restored forests, too large to belong to any known animal. Roars in the night that shook the ground, dismissed as earthquakes. A fishing vessel pulled into a North Sea dock with half its hull crushed inward. Collision with ice, they claimed, though there was no ice left to collide with. But then came a carcass. It was found outside Berlin, in a grove that hadn't existed 6 months earlier. The creature was massive, its body tangled in broken trees, as though it had stumbled through the forest until it collapsed. It had claws like spears, teeth like ivory sabers. No one could name it. No one could even agree on when in prehistory it had lived. The engine was reaching deeper. Dr. Kovacs warned the council. He begged them to shut it down, to scale it back, to limit its reach. But by then, the world was drunk on green. No one wanted to stop. No one wanted to believe that the miracle had teeth. I remember the night the first city was attacked. It was in Brazil, Manaus, a city surrounded by the reborn Amazon, where the trees now rose higher than the old towers. Something came out of that forest, not one creature but dozens. Their shapes were barely captured on the few cameras that survived, but what we saw was impossible. Some looked like reptiles, but moved like cats. Others were hulking masses of muscle with faces that were almost human. Thousands died before dawn. By the next day, the survivors had fled, leaving the jungle to whatever had claimed it. That was when fear replaced joy. But the worst was yet to come, because the engine didn't just bring back animals. It didn't just bring back monsters. It brought back people. Not us. Not the kind of people who would sit and read or talk or build machines. These were older, wilder. Their language was a tangle of guttural roars, their eyes burning with a hatred I can't describe. When the first of them stumbled into our outposts, we tried to help them. We thought they were lost, confused. But they weren't lost. They were home. The earth had not been restored for us. It had been reclaimed for them. I used to believe monsters belonged to stories. That no matter how dark our world became, at least the creatures that haunted our ancestors' nightmares were buried forever. The Genesis engine proved me wrong. The first time I saw one alive, not in broken footage, not as bones in a museum, was 3 weeks after Manaus fell. I was stationed at an observation outpost in Bavaria, a temporary post meant to monitor how far the reborn forest was spreading. The trees were strange there, thicker, darker, with leaves that felt waxy to the touch and carried veins that glowed faintly in the night. We didn't know at the time, but those trees weren't from the Holocene. They weren't from our era at all. The engine had dragged them out of some forgotten epoch. At 2:17 in the morning, the forest moved. That's the only way I can describe it. It wasn't a single tree shifting or a wind rolling through. It was the entire tree line bending as though something massive pressed its way out. We thought it was an earthquake, until we heard it. A sound so low it rattled the fillings in my teeth. Not a roar, not exactly. It was more like stone grinding against stone, but alive, resonant, hungry. My hand shook as I gripped the rail of the outpost. Around me, the others froze. And then it stepped into the floodlights. It dwarfed the tower. Its body looked reptilian, scaled in places, feathered in others, as if evolution hadn't yet decided what it should be. Its skull was long, ridged with horns, and its jaw split wider than seemed possible. Saliva. No, not saliva. Some kind of phosphorescent fluid dripped from its teeth, burning the soil where it landed. The floodlights cut out the moment its eyes met ours. That's when I realized the lights hadn't failed. The creature had done it. It emitted a pulse, some kind of bioelectric discharge that fried every circuit within reach. The tower went dark. Radios hissed and died. We were blind. By dawn, half the team was gone. No screams, no fighting, just gone. I found blood on the stairs, and the railings bent outward as though someone had been dragged over them. We abandoned the post, running through a forest that felt alive in ways no forest should. Trees seemed to lean, almost listening. At one point, I swear I felt something brush against my back, but when I turned, there was nothing but mist. When we finally reached the evacuation point, I realized we hadn't been escaping. We had been herded, and waiting for us were not beasts, but humans. At least, they looked human in the broadest sense. The group was small, 5 or 6 figures, their bodies lean, muscled, covered in hide stitched from animals I didn't recognize. Their faces were sharp, their brows heavy, their eyes deep-set and burning with something primal. They carried weapons, stone, wood, bone, but the way they moved, the way they looked at us, told me they didn't need them. They circled us like wolves. One of them stepped forward, a man whose hair was matted with clay and blood. He said something, a growl of syllables strung together like gravel poured through a throat. It wasn't language as we know it, but I understood the intent. We weren't welcome. One of my colleagues, a linguist named Haru, raised his hands, trying to show peace. He tried words in half a dozen tongues: German, English, even reconstructed Proto-Indo-European. Nothing. The man's face hardened. Then he lunged. I don't remember firing. I don't remember aiming. But my rifle cracked, and the figure dropped, his chest a red ruin. The others roared. Not in grief, not in shock, but in fury, like a hunting pack denied its meal. They scattered back into the trees, their shapes vanishing in seconds. That night, Haru hung himself. He said the man I'd shot wasn't an enemy. He said he recognized fragments of language in the guttural growl. Something old, something that connected to us in ways we couldn't understand. They are us, he wrote in his final note. And we murdered our reflection. I couldn't sleep after that. I still can't. Because Haru was right. The engine hadn't just brought back ancient beasts. It had reached into the long, dark grave of human history and pulled our ancestors back into the light. Not Homo sapiens like us. Something older, stronger, built for survival in a world that would have killed us within hours. Neanderthals, Denisovans, or maybe species we never even named, ones that lived and died before bones could fossilize. And they hated us. At first, they came in scattered groups, appearing near engine-restored zones. They raided supply lines, ambushed convoys, struck villages that had begun to thrive again in the reborn green. Each time we underestimated them. Each time we paid the price. They weren't savages. They weren't fools. They were strategists, hunters who had once survived megafauna we couldn't even imagine. And the worst part? The beasts followed them. Wherever these resurrected humans went, the monsters went too, as if the two were bound. Whether it was symbiosis, domestication, or something older, some shared origin we never understood, I don't know. But I watched it with my own eyes, a group of 20 or so primal humans guiding a beast the size of a transport helicopter, its hide scarred, its claws dragging trenches in the earth. They didn't fear it. They commanded it. The wars that followed weren't like the wars we used to fight. There were no battle lines, no fronts. The enemy was everywhere, in forests, in fields, in cities we had thought safe. They moved at night, striking with precision, disappearing before dawn. We called them phantoms. Some said they weren't human at all, but I knew better. They were us. The Genesis Council tried to shut the engine down once the truth became undeniable. But it was too late. The device had gone beyond our control. It pulsed on its own, waves of bioresonance rippling through the soil, the air, the water. Each wave brought more. More beasts. More humans. More of the old world bleeding into ours. By the second year, Earth no longer belonged to us. Cities became fortresses, their walls bristling with guns. Travel outside them was suicide. Communication networks failed as the engine's interference grew, until we were reduced to shortwave radios and desperate couriers. I lived through the fall of Geneva, the place where it all began. They came at dawn, not with siege engines or artillery, but with silence. Radios went dead. Drones dropped from the sky. The air filled with the smell of iron and ozone, the mark of the beast's pulses. Then, from the treeline, they emerged. Not hundreds, thousands. Men and women who had no place in this century, their faces painted in blood, their voices raised in a war cry that shook the bones of the earth. Behind them, shadows moved. Things too large, too twisted for the human eye to comprehend. The city fell in hours. I ran. I don't even remember how. The streets were chaos, people trampling each other, soldiers firing blind into the smoke. I remember the scream of metal as something tore through the eastern wall, and the last sight of Dr. Kovacs, standing on the balcony of the council hall, staring at the oncoming tide as though it were the answer to a question only he had ever asked. He didn't run. He didn't fight. He just stood there, arms open, until the swarm reached him. Sometimes I wonder if he wanted it. If he knew this was never about saving our world. Maybe he believed the Earth had chosen, and it hadn't chosen us. Now I wonder what's left. I move between survivor enclaves, never staying too long. The forests are spreading faster now, the rivers carving new paths, the oceans alive with shapes no sailor can name. Everywhere I go, I feel watched. Sometimes by eyes burning in the dark. Sometimes by faces that could be my own, if only evolution had turned a different way. And I keep asking myself the same question. Do we save the planet, or just give it back to those it truly belonged to? I don't know how long I wandered after Geneva fell. Days, maybe weeks. Time lost meaning when every hour was survival. I had no plan, no direction, just the instinct to keep moving. Cities were gone. Roads were death traps. Forests had become hunting grounds. The world wasn't ours anymore, and I was too stubborn to admit it. The nightmares came first. At night, I'd dream of faces, human, but not. Broad brows, heavy jaws, teeth bared not in smiles, but in challenge. When I woke, I could still feel their eyes on me, watching from the tree-line. Sometimes, when the wind was still, I heard the sound of flutes. Not like ours. Crude, hollow, made from bone. The notes carried in the dark, rising and falling in patterns that made my skin crawl. It wasn't music. It was territory, a warning. I thought I'd die alone out there. And maybe I should have. But fate, or maybe the engine, had other plans. It happened near the ruins of Lion. The city had been reclaimed by forest, vines crawling up crumbling apartments, roots breaking through highways. I had scavenged food from an abandoned ration depot, enough to last me a week if I stretched it. I was leaving when I heard them. Footsteps, too light for beasts, too many for scavengers. By the time I realized I was surrounded, it was too late. They melted out of the shadows like they had always been there, a dozen figures with weapons in hand. Spears tipped with sharpened bone, clubs studded with stone. Their bodies were smeared with ash, their hair knotted with feathers and blood. Primal humans. I froze. My rifle hung useless at my side. I had enough bullets for maybe 2, 3 shots, and I knew it wouldn't matter. If I fired, I'd die before I could reload. One of them stepped forward, a woman. Her face was broad, her muscles thick as rope beneath her skin. But her eyes weren't savage. They were calculating, measuring. She barked something to the others, and they closed in. I braced for death. Instead, they bound my hands. I don't remember the march. Only flashes, the tug of rope cutting my wrists, the sting of branches whipping my face, the constant sense of being prey led through a predator's den. When we reached their camp, I thought I had been taken back in time. It wasn't chaos as I expected. It was order. Hides stretched into shelters. Fire pits surrounded by stones. Children, their hair tangled but their eyes bright, playing with carved figures that looked disturbingly like the beasts I'd seen. Men sharpening weapons. Women preparing food. And around them, beasts themselves, not as pets but as partners. Small ones, dog-sized with jaws of knives, sitting beside hunters like wolves at a fire. Larger ones chained with vines, their hides scarred, their eyes glowing faintly in the dark. The tribe didn't treat me as an enemy. Not first. They dragged me to the center, where an elder waited. His face was lined, his beard thick and streaked with gray. He studied me with an intensity that made me feel like a bug pinned to glass. Then he spoke. I didn't understand the words, but I understood the tone. Curiosity. For days I was kept alive. Fed scraps, given water. They watched me constantly. Children would creep close, touching my clothes, tugging at my hair, laughing when I flinched. The hunters studied my rifle, turning it over in their hands as though trying to understand what kind of weapon it was. And slowly, I began to understand them. Their language was harsh, guttural, but it had rhythm. Structure. Haru had been right. It wasn't noise. It was words. And in their words, I began to hear echoes of us. Fragments that connected, as if they were an older branch of the same tree. The woman who had captured me. I learned her name was something like Shara. She was a leader among them, though not the elder. She visited me often, sometimes to test me, sometimes just to watch. Once, She placed a stone blade in my hand and gestured for me to mimic her movements as she carved wood. When I fumbled, she laughed, but not cruelly, almost kindly. That night, I lay awake listening to the flutes. And for the first time, I wondered if these people hated us or if they simply didn't know what we were. It wasn't until the hunt that I understood the truth. They took me with them, bound at the wrists but not gagged. We moved through the forest in silence, Shara at the front. I thought they were going to kill me, offer me to some beast as a sacrifice. But when the ground began to shake, when the trees split apart and a shadow fell over us, I realized what we were hunting. The creature was massive, taller than the tallest cranes, with a neck that arched like a serpent and legs that crushed trees beneath its weight. Its call was a low bellow that rolled through the forest like thunder. I panicked. The tribe didn't. They moved as one, a pack in perfect rhythm. Nets woven from vines hurled over its head, spears driven into its flanks, beasts unleashed, snapping at its legs. Shara climbed the creature's back like a spider, her blade flashing as she stabbed at the base of its skull. It took an hour, maybe more, but when the beast finally fell, the ground quaked as though the earth itself shuddered. The tribe roared in triumph. Children ran from the camp to watch as the carcass was stripped, every part used: hide for shelter, bone for weapons, meat for food. And me? They unbound my hands, pressed a blade into my palm, gestured for me to cut. I did. I don't know why. Maybe because refusal meant death. Maybe because some part of me, the part that had starved, that had run, that had watched the world collapse, recognized them. Not as enemies, not as monsters, but as survivors. That night they feasted. Fires burned high, shadows leaping across trees that seemed to bend closer to listen. The flutes played, but now I heard patterns in the sound, not just warnings but songs. History, memory, a story carried not in books, but in breath. The elder sat beside me. He spoke, slowly, pointing to the stars, to the forest, to me. His words were incomprehensible, but his meaning was clear enough. The world had turned. The old had returned, and we were the anomaly. For the first time, I felt something worse than fear. I felt irrelevant, as if humanity, my humanity, was nothing more than a brief interruption in a story much older, and now the story was correcting itself. And deep inside, a darker thought stirred. Maybe they deserved this world more than we ever did. I never meant to stay with them. At first, I told myself it was survival, that I was only playing along, only biding time until I could escape. But the longer I lived among the tribe, the harder it became to see them as enemies. They were brutal, yes, savage in ways that chilled me. But they were also something else, something we had lost. They belonged. Every breath they took, every movement was in rhythm with the forest. When they killed, they used every piece. When they built, it was from what the land offered. Even their songs, those eerie flutes carved from bone, were shaped by the howls of beasts and the wind through the trees. There was no waste, no arrogance, no illusion of control. And me? I was the outlier, the broken one, a refugee of a world that had destroyed itself. It didn't happen all at once, but slowly, piece by piece, the walls I had built crumbled. I found myself laughing when the children mocked my clumsiness. I learned words, simple ones from Shara, enough to ask for water, for food, to follow commands. At night, I sat with the elder as he traced shapes in the dirt, pointing to the sky, to beasts, to me, repeating words until I began to understand. Their language wasn't primitive. It was layered, filled with rhythm and inflection that carried meaning beyond words. They spoke of the earth not as ground, but as a living thing. They spoke of beasts not as monsters, but as kin. And they spoke of us, of me, as shadows. Ghosts. People who had stolen fire from the world and burned it with greed. At first, I bristled, but in the quiet, I couldn't argue. Because hadn't we? The tribe called themselves something like Ashari. It meant the remembered. They believed they had always existed, that the Genesis engine had not resurrected them, but merely revealed what had been hidden, as if they had been waiting in the marrow of the earth, patient and eternal. I tried to explain what we had done, that the engine had created this, that we had rewound biology. But the elder only shook his head. No, he said, pressing his palm to the ground. Not created. Awakened. That word haunted me. Awakened. It suggested the world hadn't been dead, only sleeping. And in waking it, we had stirred something we were never meant to face. I might have stayed forever. I might have become one of them, if not for what happened next. It was during a hunt. A small group of us had been tracking a beast near the Rhone, a predator that stalked by sound alone. It was unlike anything I'd seen. Six-legged, its body long and serpentine, its skin stretched tight like drum leather. It moved in silence until it struck, guided by vibrations. Even the SCI-FI treated it with caution. We found its den at dusk. The tribe circled, whispering in guttural tones. I was kept in the center, as always, a half-prisoner, half-pet. But then I saw something they didn't. Tracks, human tracks. Boot prints, not bare feet. Modern. My heart froze. I hadn't seen prints like that in months. I thought my people, my kind, were gone from this region. But there they were, leading into the den. Survivors. Soldiers, maybe. A scouting team. I tried to warn the tribe. I gestured frantically, pointed to the prints. Shara scowled, not understanding at first. When she did, her expression hardened. She gave an order. 2 hunters slipped into the den. Gunfire cracked seconds later. Muffled screams. Then silence. When the hunters returned, they carried rifles. My rifles. And blood soaked their hides. I stared at the weapons, my stomach twisting. They hadn't just killed beasts. They'd killed people. Survivors like me. My people. That night, as the tribe feasted on the serpent beast, I sat apart. The elder approached, laying one of the captured rifles at my feet. His gaze was heavy, unreadable. You, he said in his broken tone. Choose. I didn't understand at first. Then I saw Shara watching me. The hunters, too. Their eyes weren't just curious anymore. They were testing me. Choose. Them. Or us. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the rifle. Part of me wanted to scream, to take it, to fire until every last one of them was dead, to avenge the blood they had spilled. But another part, the part that had eaten their food, learned their words, hunted by their side, whispered that maybe my people weren't mine anymore, that maybe I didn't belong with either side. In the end, I did nothing. I left the rifle on the ground. The elder nodded, as though that was answer enough. Shara's gaze softened, almost approving. But deep inside, I knew what I had done. I had betrayed my kind. After that night, I was no longer treated as a prisoner. The ropes vanished. The tribe let me move freely among them. Some even laughed with me, as though I had finally crossed some invisible threshold. I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt hollow, because every time I closed my eyes, I saw those boot prints in the dirt. And I knew the people who had left them were dead because of me. Worse still, I began to realize something. The SCI-FI weren't just surviving. They were spreading. Tribes like theirs were multiplying across the reborn world. Linking, growing. The beasts weren't accidents of the engine. They were tools, allies, even weapons. And humanity? We were shrinking. I heard it in rumors carried by refugees before the tribe silenced them. New York overrun. London abandoned. Beijing fractured into enclaves. Fortress cities falling one by one, their defenses crumbling not against beasts, but against coordinated attacks. Tribes working together, herding monsters like cavalry, overwhelming walls that once seemed invincible. The past wasn't just walking beside us anymore. It was devouring us. The elder told me something on the eve of the next hunt. He looked to the stars, his eyes reflecting firelight, and said, "Old world come back, new world end." And for the first time, I didn't argue, because deep in my heart, I feared he was right. I used to think survival was simple. Eat, breathe, hide, fight, do whatever it takes to see another sunrise. But after living with the SCI-FI, after walking the edge between two worlds, I realized survival wasn't about breathing. It was about belonging, and I didn't belong anywhere. The breaking point came in winter, or what passed for winter now. The seasons had changed since the engine's awakening. Snow fell where it hadn't in decades, while other places burned beneath alien suns. Nothing felt stable. The earth itself seemed to shudder in confusion. Our tribe had moved north, following herds of creatures that looked like mammoths, but with spiraled tusks that glowed faintly in moonlight. The hunt was brutal. I watched the Ashari fell one of the beasts with traps and spears, tearing its flesh apart with a joy I couldn't share. They sang as the snow steamed with its blood. That night, as the fires burned and the children danced, I slipped away. I don't know what I expected. Maybe death, maybe freedom. I only knew I couldn't keep pretending. The rifle they'd given me hung heavy on my back, and with every step through the snow, I felt the weight of the choice I had been avoiding. That's when I found them. Not beasts, not Ashari. Humans. My humans. A small group, huddled in the ruins of what had once been a gas station. Its roof caved in, its walls scrawled with desperate warnings. They were thin, ragged, armed with whatever scraps they could salvage. But their eyes lit up when they saw me. Jesus, one of them whispered. A survivor. They pulled me inside, offered me water, food. Real food, canned beans, stale bread. I hadn't tasted anything like it in months. As I ate, they asked me questions. Where I'd been, what I'd seen, how many of the Ashari there were. I hesitated. For the first time in a long time, I was with people who spoke my language, who share my memories of the old world, who remembered electricity, engines, airplanes, music. But every question they asked felt like a knife twisting deeper. Because the answers were the same. We were losing. They told me they had a plan. A last chance. Deep in the Alps, where the Genesis project had begun, there was a secondary control facility. A failsafe. If we could reach it, we might be able to shut the engine down. Destroy it, the leader said, his voice hard. Stop this madness before nothing's left of us. I should have felt hope. Instead, I felt dread. Because part of me knew the truth. The engine wasn't just a machine anymore. It had become part of the planet. It pulsed like a heart, its waves spreading through soil, through oceans, through air. Could something like that even be stopped? And if it could, should it? Still, I agreed to go. What choice did I have? We traveled at night, moving through forests alive with eyes. Sometimes I swore I heard Shara's flute in the distance, its hollow notes carrying through the trees. I imagined her watching me, waiting for me to return. But I didn't look back. When we finally reached the facility, my breath caught. It was buried into the mountain, its doors half crushed by rock falls, its walls cracked but still standing. Snow drifted against broken floodlights. The place felt dead, abandoned. But as we entered, I heard it, the hum. Low, steady, like the sound of blood in your ears. The engine was alive. Inside, the halls were choked with vines, moss crawling over steel. Lights flickered faintly, powered by something deeper than circuits. The survivors moved cautiously, weapons raised, but I could feel the pulse through the floor. Each step closer made my chest tighten, my vision blur. At the heart of the facility, we found it. Not the engine itself, that was buried far below, beyond anything we could touch, but a control node, still active. Screens flickered, displaying data in languages half familiar, half forgotten. DNA sequences scrolled like endless prayers. And in the center, a terminal with a single prompt. Override. The leader turned to me. Do it. My hands hovered over the keys. All I had to do was enter the sequence. Shut it down. Stop the pulses. Stop the resurrection. Stop the world from tearing itself apart. But then the hum changed. It deepened, resonated. And I heard it, not with my ears but inside my skull. A voice vast and ancient. Not words, not exactly, but meaning. You are the shadow. They are the memory. The earth chooses. I staggered back, clutching my head. The others stared, demanding answers. But how could I explain what I had felt? That the engine wasn't malfunctioning. It wasn't out of control. It was doing exactly what it had been built to do. Not to restore our world, but to restore the world. The Ashari weren't accidents. The beasts weren't mistakes. They were the Earth's memory, rewritten into flesh. And us? We were an interruption. A brief anomaly the planet was correcting. The leader grabbed me, shaking me. Do it. Shut it down. And for a moment, I almost did. But then I thought of Shara, of the children laughing as they tugged at my hair, of the elder tracing stars in the dirt, of the hunt, the songs, the way the tribe lived with the world, not against it. They didn't burn the earth. They didn't poison the oceans. They didn't silence the birds. We did. Maybe Haru had been right all along. Maybe they were us. Not our enemies. Not our mistakes, but our reflection. I looked at the screen one last time. My fingers hovered, and then I turned away. No, I whispered. It's not ours anymore. The survivors screamed. They cursed me, called me traitor. Some raised their weapons. But before they could fire, the hum surged. The walls shook. The vines writhed like serpents. And from the shadows of the facility, they came. The Eshari, Shar at their head. The battle was chaos. Bullets cracking, spears flying, beasts roaring as they tore through steel and flesh. I don't know how I survived. I only remember falling, the world spinning, Shara's hand pulling me up. Her eyes burned, not with hatred, but with something fiercer. Recognition. When the noise died, the humans were gone. Torn apart, scattered, erased. The control node was shattered, vines crawling over its screens. The engine pulsed steady, unstoppable. Shara pressed her hand to my chest, over my heart. She said one word. Eshari. Remembered. That was the night I stopped running. Now I walk with them. I hunt. I sing. I carve bone flutes and play their songs beneath alien stars. The world is no longer ours, but perhaps it never was. We tried to heal the planet. Instead, we gave it back to itself. And in its memory, I have found my place. Not as a savior, not as a survivor, but as a shadow of what was and a witness to what will be.